It started with the most ridiculous thing, a planter. I know, right? A stupid planter. But let me tell you, it didn't end that way. No, not by a long shot. And trust me, you're going to want to hear how this story plays out. So here's how it went down. It was a Thursday when everything kicked off. I had just come back from grocery shopping exhausted. You know, that kind of tired where you don't want to think about anything, just unload the bags and collapse on the couch for a minute. That kind of tired. I grabbed my groceries, and just as I was about to head inside, I saw it, a bright orange flyer wedged under my front door. Not in the mailbox, but under the door like someone had carefully placed it there. I stood there in the driveway, groceries in hand, staring at this thing. HOA violation notice. Bolded at the top. Now you have to understand, I had just done a walkthrough of my property the week before. I knew everything was up to code. My lawn was perfect. The fence was within regulations. The gutters were clear. Everything was good to go. So when I saw that notice, I thought, what the heck could this possibly be about? I put down the bags, took a deep breath, and opened the notice. And I started laughing. I'm talking full-on chuckling to myself standing there alone on my porch, because the violation, decorative structure encroaching on shared visual space and disrupting neighborhood aesthetic cohesion. Decorative structure. A planter. A small planter about the size of a medium dog sitting on my lawn 4 feet from the sidewalk holding a cute little ornamental tree. That was it. That was the violation. Now here's where it gets interesting. I didn't buy that planter on a whim. When I moved into this neighborhood, I did my homework. I read the HOA bylaws, 47 pages of them. Yeah, it was as awful as it sounds. But I made sure everything I added to my property was within their little rule book. That planter, it was within the allowed dimensions, the materials were approved, the color wasn't on the restricted list, everything was fine. So I wasn't scared, I was just annoyed. Annoyed that someone had filed a complaint about something that wasn't even a violation. And if you're wondering who might have filed it, well, I had a good guess. It was Karen. You know, the neighbor directly across the street. Not next door, no, she had the prime spot across the street with a clear view of my lawn from her living room window. I'd seen her standing there before, arms crossed, just watching. The kind of neighbor who knows the comings and goings of everyone. But this was different. Karen wasn't just watching, she was evaluating. And apparently my planter didn't make the cut. Now I wasn't about to move it. I didn't have to. So I calmly sent an email to the HOA board explaining that the planter was fully compliant. I attached the relevant bylaw sections asking them to reconsider and rescind the violation. I was polite, professional, and if I'm being honest, completely reasonable. And here's where it got weird. The board responded within 24 hours, which almost never happens. But they didn't say, "You're right, we'll look into it." No, they sent a second warning letter. Not a citation yet, but still a second warning for something that shouldn't have even been an issue. And buried at the bottom of the email was a line that made my blood run cold. The complaint was submitted by a resident with documented concerns about visual corridor integrity in the cul-de-sac area. Visual corridor integrity. I read that line 3 times trying to make sense of it. Someone knew their HOA language. This wasn't just a neighbor venting. This was someone who had done their research. They knew the jargon. They were prepared. And that's when I knew things were going to escalate. But not in the way I expected. Because a couple of days later, I wasn't home when it happened. I was in the backyard doing some maintenance when out of nowhere I walked inside to see my planter knocked over. The tree was half out of the soil, roots exposed, the planter cracked. Something had hit it hard. I stood there in disbelief, then did what any reasonable person would do. I checked the security footage. I had a doorbell camera I installed months ago, best decision I ever made. I rewound the footage and there she was. Karen. At 2:47 in the afternoon, she stepped onto my lawn, looked both ways, then kicked my planter hard enough to knock it over. Then she walked back across the street like it was no big deal. I watched that footage 3 times, mouth open, staring at the screen. She had just walked onto my private property and destroyed my property. I didn't call the police. I didn't confront her. I didn't post about it. I just sat there with it. I saved the footage, backed it up, then went outside, carefully set the planter back up and made a decision. I wasn't going to do anything yet. I was going to wait. Let me give you some context about Karen. She wasn't just some random neighbor. She was a fixture at HOA meetings. Not an official member, mind you, but she showed up to every meeting and had something to say about everything. Lawn height, trash cans, holiday decorations, you name it. And according to Mike, my neighbor, She once convinced the board to send a warning letter to a family because their welcome mat didn't fit the neighborhood's visual standard. Yeah, that's Karen. So when the board sent that second warning letter, I knew it wasn't just about a flower pot. Karen had influence, real influence. And that footage, it was going to be important. But I didn't know just how important until a week later when things escalated even further. I had repaired the planter. I patched it up, repainted it, and put it back exactly where it was. Same tree, same position, same everything. And then on a Saturday afternoon, Karen came out. She walked across the street, calm, smiling. She said, "I think we need to have a conversation about this structure." I calmly told her I had already spoken with the HOA and the planter was fully compliant. And then she said something that made me question everything. The rules say one thing, but the spirit of the rules says another. The spirit of the rules. What does that even mean? I told her I wasn't interested in the spirit of anything. The planter met every written requirement and I had no intention of moving it. She smiled, nodded, and walked back inside. And that feeling, that low, quiet feeling in my stomach, it came back. Something was coming. I didn't know what. But something was coming. Barely 30 seconds after Karen went back inside, I heard footsteps. Fast footsteps. Karen was marching back across the street, arms stiff, face red. She came right up to me, pointed at the planter, and said, "It doesn't belong here." And before I could even respond, she kicked it hard. This wasn't a little nudge. This was a full emotional kick. And this time the planter cracked. The tree fell out. Soil scattered everywhere. And Karen stood there breathing heavily, looking at what she'd done. Then she looked at me, daring me to say something. But I didn't. I just looked at her. I looked at the broken planter. I looked at my neighbor Janet, who had stopped what she was doing and was staring at the whole thing. And I said nothing. I went inside, shut the door behind me, and heard Karen mutter something as I walked away. It was a triumphant sound, like she thought she'd won. But here's the thing, she didn't win. Because I had been recording everything just like she had. And when I reviewed the footage that night, something caught my eye. Her phone. She wasn't just throwing a tantrum. She was recording the whole thing, trying to get me to react so she could take it to the HOA and say I had intimidated her. But she didn't get a reaction. She got nothing. And that's when I knew this wasn't just a neighbor dispute. It was a game she was playing, and I had just accidentally played my part perfectly. But now that I knew I needed a plan of my own, I contacted the HOA, but this time I went in person. I drove to the property manager's office and laid everything out, the violation notice, the emails, the footage of the first kick, the second and the third, including the part where she filmed me. I even asked if there were any complaints about me in the past 30 days. When the property manager hesitated, I knew something was off. And sure enough, that night I got an email from the HOA. Karen had filed a complaint against me alleging I had been intimidating. She claimed that I had created a hostile environment. The complaint referenced the exact time she kicked the planter for the second time. It was all part of her plan. And almost it worked. But I wasn't about to let that happen. I found something about Karen in the public record, something that explained every complaint, every violation notice. And then I did something permanent. I built a new planter, a permanent one that was cemented into the ground 18 inches deep. I had all the documentation, all the proof. And when Karen came across the street looking to make her point, she kicked the planter again. But this time it didn't move. Not an inch. And she broke her foot. She tried to sue me, but by then I had everything. The HOA dismissed her complaints, and Karen, well, she hasn't been back to a board meeting since. Sometimes justice comes in the form of a planted tree. And sometimes karma really does come around. Did I go too far? I built something legal, something compliant, something permanent. But she chose to keep pushing. So, what do you think? Did I go too far, or did Karen get exactly what was coming to her? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share your own stories. Let's talk about how far you'd go to stand up for yourself.